Welcome to episode 39 on the journey to conscious healthcare. This is series 8 called Beyond the Burn, Tools for Lasting Fulfillment. In this podcast, we explore what it takes to consciously create longevity, happiness, and fulfillment in your life and that of others. The journey to conscious healthcare looks at the healthcare industry, disability sector, and how to best navigate these areas to get the best for you and your life. I'm your host, Trevor Keane, and I'm the founder and CEO of Conscious Healthcare SA, an expert company that is known for high-quality healthcare services and transforming the healthcare industry in the disability space. Today's show is also sponsored by us at Conscious Healthcare SA. Conscious Healthcare SA has 2 clinics, one based up north in Mawson Lakes in South Australia, and the other in Seacliff down south. Not only that, we've got instant capacity for psychology services, and you heard it first here. Get in touch via our website or call our team to ensure you don't have to sit on yet another waitlist. Today, I'd like to introduce you to Joe Pane, who is a distinguished expert in human behaviour, holding degrees in psychology and sociology. Since 2006, he has delivered emotional fitness keynotes, workshops to tens of thousands of people, focusing on enhancing emotional resilience and well-being. Joe is the creator of the Emotional Fitness Formula, an online program designed to help organizations and individuals effectively navigate uncertainty. He's also trained over 7,000 behavioral coaches, equipping them with the skills to foster emotional fitness in various settings. Joe's also the author of a book called The Courage to Be You, serves as a great guide to mastering uncertainty, reflecting his commitment to empowering individuals to lead authentic and emotionally resilient lives. On that note, thank you so much for joining us today, Joe.
I really appreciate having me here, Trevor. Thank you.
Not a worry. Well, our first question that we jump off is the personal one. So I'd love to know for you, what is it that you wanted to do when you were growing up?
Yeah, so I wanted to be an entertainer. So I remember taking singing lessons. That didn't work out too well. And I remember doing all kinds of weird and wacky things at home to entertain visitors. That didn't work out too well for the long term, and I couldn't figure out a way of carving out a career in that. So what I figured was I enjoyed people, I enjoyed being in front of people, and that kind of eventually evolved into me becoming a professional speaker and trainer and facilitator and coach and all that kind of thing. So it's worked out for the best, I think.
It's quite interesting. I mean, I suppose in many regards, I think you probably ended up getting there. Maybe not the entertainer that you envisaged, but in a roundabout way, I sort of feel like you're doing that today.
Yeah, I guess in a way I am. Yeah.
Yeah, fantastic. I'd love to jump in. So your tool that you've developed, the Emotional Fitness Formula, what inspired you to start going on this journey?
Well, I've always had a fascination into the human condition, human behavior, relationships, understanding how people navigate and experience the world. And it dawned on me a number of years ago that psychologically speaking, the relationship that we have with uncertainty is something of immense importance. Like, it's a crucial relationship because of the fact that uncertainty is like a prerequisite. It's a precursory seed to all growth. And I have not been able to find any examples on Earth or anywhere in the universe where that is not true. Like, everything is either growing or dying, nothing's staying still. And so what contributes significantly to perpetual growth, consistency of growth, or growth in our own spirit, in our own awareness, in our relationships, in our skills, to grow anything we want to grow sustainably, we need to have a really functional relationship with uncertainty. And so that's then I converted that into the terminology of emotional fitness, and then created the Emotional Fitness Formula from that, where I distilled sort of the main chunks of thought system, if you like, that actually contribute most significantly to boosting our relationship with uncertainty.
Oh, that's fantastic. I'm curious to know uncertainty. Why the topic of uncertainty?
Well, as I was just sharing, because it's so important in regards to our growth and also life. Life, our responsibilities continue to expand. As we grow older, go through different life stages and phases, we need to keep up with who we're becoming. We need to keep up with the demands of what life is demanding of us. And the only way that we can do that effectively and sustainably is by making sure that we have this, a resourceful relationship with uncertainty. And then when COVID happened, that was just a booster to my work, because uncertainty became, front headlines for 2 years, front of house, front of mind headlines for 2 years. And I was blessed because I got busier than normal. But the point I'm making is that, that relationship with uncertainty has always been a crucial aspect to our psychological landscape. So I think it's worth diving into.
No, it's fantastic. Probably didn't ask that the right way. I was sort of more going if there was a pivotal sort of moment or experience that particularly made
Oh,
that stun out instead of something else. But I mean, COVID obviously was in there, but I think you're already on your journey at that stage. Was there a
yeah.
moment that made uncertainty stand out to you
I
above
see.
any
I
other
see. Yeah,
things?
that's a good question. Yeah, a couple of key moments. I mean, these are moments that light a fire under you, and the first moment was in the mid '90s. So after I finished my time at uni, I was blessed enough to get a job at Ford Motor Company in Victoria, and in the manufacturing plant where they used to produce the Ford Falcon, which was a big selling model at the time back in the '80s and '90s. My God, that's a long time ago, right? And but mid to late '90s, I worked there mid '90s as a rehabilitation counsellor, and it was a job that I couldn't stand, not because of the rehab counselling itself, but because of the toxic environment, which I didn't even know these terms even existed. Toxic environments,
Mm,
secondary agendas, people malingering. I didn't know that this world even existed. I went in there quite green. Anyway, I lasted about 2 years, and I realized that the complexity of the manufacturing culture is not for me, and I just don't know how to play the game. I'm not interested in playing the game. So I was walking through the cafeteria at Ford Motor Company, which is pretty big, and on my way to my office, which is kind of like a sort of off there. And I had a moment where I thought to myself, so this is it, right? I've invested 4 years of my life at uni, and here I am. I've got a job. I'm getting paid really well, except there's it's like my soul is empty. Like there's nothing here.
mm,
And I didn't have this language at the time, but if I was to put language on it, that's where the desperation to get off the hamster wheel of having a job began. And that's
mm,
where that was the initial spark. And uh, I did end up leaving, but I was at a bit of a career crisis point, because even though I was only 2 years into my career journey after uni, right? But I hit this fork in the road, and I didn't know what to do. So in the meantime, I thought, well, it's important to keep moving and keep active and keep engaged with life. So I started working I went through a very long-winded application process, but I got a job for a real estate office in my local area, working for a father and son business. And I loved their work because their niche were families. They worked purely in residential sales for families. 90% of their business was. The people were great, great culture, great people. And I ended up staying there for 7 years, and that taught me more about human behavior than all my subjects in my psychology degree put together, and that's a fact. And and that's when I began to realize how important uncertainty is, in the sense of how we navigate, how well we're able to navigate confusion, doubt, fear, uncertainty itself, which is that these are all expressions of uncertainty, pressure, challenge, stress. I'll use the terms loosely, anxiety and depression, because those two
mm.
words are overused in today's vernacular. They're just so overused. When people need to understand that anxiety and depression, in a lot of cases, is a very healthy response to a very difficult situation. And so I experienced anxiety and depression, but not in the way it's used in the as you might find it on TikTok. But so these are all different flavors of uncertainty, and that's when it started. So as I got through my real estate career, I finished that because I kind of like outgrew it in a way, because there was no other opportunities for me to develop myself. I couldn't take over the business. There was no profit share opportunities. I was going to stay in the same role. That was it forever. And I thought, no, well, this can't be. So I took 15 months off, and I had a sabbatical, which I didn't realize I was having at the time. And I worked very closely as a volunteer for a husband and wife couple, a beautiful couple who ran a teacher training and meditation training business. And they allowed me to go through their entire program as a volunteer and as a helper. And I did these 7-day silent retreats. I did these vision quests. I did these incredible experiential, residential retreats that just absolutely transformed the way I saw the world. And then I circled back to my passion for human behavior, and I started my own coaching and training business back in 2006, early 2006. And that's where the emotional fitness work, the seed of it actually was begun there. And it was also around, well, how well you navigate uncertainty matters heaps. And becoming emotionally fit doesn't mean that uncertainty becomes easier, Trevor. It just means that it gives you a sense of direction and clarity when you are stuck in the psychological quagmire of pressure and stress and all those kinds of things.
Oh, that's fantastic. I think it fits in really nicely, specifically in regards to you're curious about uncertainty. You then put yourself in so many situations where there's a lot of uncertainty there, right? And then how you overcome it. So then, it makes a whole lot of sense. Then you start learning how to navigate it yourself and then help others navigate it, which is what you now do. On that note, can you walk us through what the emotional fitness formula actually is? So for those that don't know.
Yeah. So the emotional fitness formula has got 5 core principles. These 5 different sort of psychological areas of life. I figure if you can navigate these well and do these well, you'll do really well with your energy, your emotion, and how you feel about life. So these are in order of poundage or in order of power, in order of impact. And the first one is identity. So identity is, you can define identity in so many different ways. Fundamentally, in EFF, the emotional fitness formula, we say that identity is what you allow yourself to be defined by, because what you're defined by owns your entire psychological landscape. So in other words, what defines me owns me. If I'm defined by the results I'm getting in my career or in my business or in my relationship, then when things go sour, which they will, we have wins and losses, I will take those losses profoundly personally because my identity is wrapped up in it. And identity is, without doubt, the single most powerful force in the human condition. And the reason why that's true is because we will do anything to remain consistent with it. And what we define ourselves with or by, we grow a hypersensitivity around. So in other words, if I'm going back to that example being defined by my results, I grow this hypersensitive attachment to how I'm doing, and which means I'm heavily reliant upon how I'm doing in comparison to Trevor, to Joan, to Jack, to David, to whoever. How am I doing as a father in comparison to Trevor? How are my kids doing? And we start doing all of this comparison game, and identity can be the source of a lot of angst and making us not emotionally fit. So the work that I do is shows people how to move away from defining yourself by your roles and begin defining yourself by your character. Focus on who you're becoming rather than how well you are doing in comparison to other people. And there's a whole thing that we have around that, like a whole group of thought systems. That's the first principle. The second focus point or principle is what I call life stages. And life stages is the journey that we're all on, which is the journey from ambition to meaning, where as we progress through this journey from ambition to meaning, life becomes less and less about us and more about others. Or another way of putting it, the ambition-driven world is about becoming somebody, and the meaning-driven world is about becoming nobody. And by nobody, I don't mean, oh, you're a nobody. That's not what I mean. What I mean is where you don't care anymore about accolade and reward. All you care about is adding value. And if you can disappear in the process without getting any attention, that sounds a bit extreme. But that's kind of like the meaning-driven world where it's heading. So the ambition to meaning-driven world, the ambition to meaning-driven shift or transformation is where in the meaning-driven world, our psychology aligns more with how nature works rather than how the ego works. So the ambition-driven world is very egocentric. The meaning-driven world is very heart-centric. So that's a brief description of life stages. And the third out of the five, the third one is values. So our values are what we call in emotional fitness our emotional compass. And our emotional compass influences and affects all of our decisions and actions that we take or not take. Our emotional compass, so values are misunderstood. People believe that values, a lot of people believe that values are like respect, integrity, responsibility, as an example, when what those are more like your moral compass. And moral compass and emotional compass are two completely different things. Your morals are like your it's like your temperature gauge on your dashboard, and the values are your fuel gauge, two completely different indicators. And a value is something that we do. So there's a whole conversation around that, but that values is the third component. So we've got identity, life stages, and values. The fourth one is emotional flexibility. And emotional flexibility means that we have an awareness that emotions don't respond to facts. Emotions only respond to the interpretation or the meaning that we're giving the facts. And the meaning that we're giving something, our interpretation of something, determines how we feel about it. So our past doesn't have any impact on us. But what has impact on us is the interpretation, the meaning of our past. Now, I'm saying this respectfully to anyone who's listening here who may have had a traumatic history. I'm saying this with the greatest of sensitivity and the deepest of respect, because it is the interpretation and the meaning that we give that memory that influences how we feel about it today. And the fifth one, sorry, Trevor, please.
We'll absolutely go through the fifth one, and we can certainly go through. People can purchase your book as well if they want to go more deeper into it, because this will be more of a summary snapshot with it. But in regards to like what you're talking about with interpretation, like the projection of that then onto the future. So future circumstances, I had a bad experience, and so then I project that onto what happens now, and then because of that, I end up seeing it through that lens. Is that kind of what you're sort of saying?
Spot on. Spot on.
Yeah.
Spot on. So exactly right. Exactly right. So whether a lot of emotional fitness is really about creating a vast expansion of self-awareness, because the more self-awareness that you have, the more joy and peace you're able to extract out of life. When your self-awareness is a lot less than, say, you'd like it to be, the meaning, we tend to be more rigid. So the less self-awareness that we have, the more rigidity we have in our interpretation of what we make something mean. The wider the expanse of our self-awareness is, the more flexibility that you have in what you choose to make something mean, because whatever you make it mean is going to definitely produce an emotion or an emotional experience. So that's really, really important. And the fifth,
that makes so much sense in regards. So I remember the other day I was rocking up to an event, and the event got scheduled, and it was a different time zone, and so I thought I was rocking up 15 minutes early, thinking, oh yeah, this is all good, and I rocked in 15 minutes late. You just sort of think of what's the different perception that you sort of have. Oh, now I'm late as opposed to early. But it's time still time, right? It's just in regards to how you then sort of rock up. I will jump certainly into that that fifth one, Joe.
All good, all good. That's a good point, though. I love that example. It's a great example. The fifth one is perspective. So perspective is, of course, our philosophy of living. It's our purview on life. It's our big picture view of what we define as important versus not as important. And as far as emotional fitness goes, perspective needs to be, we need to have a very clean and healthy perspective, because we need to have a clean and healthy perspective to lean on when things get tough. And the main way, the core ingredient to what a clean and healthy perspective has, is where psychologically we have instant access to gratitude and appreciation. So in a lot of the work I do in EFF, I often, and this is where I borrow other people's ideas. So I borrow ideas from the Stoic philosophers, where, for example, in Stoicism, they talk about the power of negative visualization. And where in essence you see things a lot worse than what they actually are. So then you can be grateful for the situation that you are in because you've seen the worst version of it. It's like having a near miss on the road driving your car and getting all upset about it. And then you think to
Mm.
yourself, well, gee, another second earlier, and I could have ended up in hospital with my half my body busted up. So, and suddenly you're glad that you had a near miss, you see. So it's that power of negative visualization is the doorway to gratitude and appreciation. You have instant access to gratitude and appreciation. You create a very clean perspective that you can lean on when, as I said, when things get tough.
It's quite fascinating, Joe, because I've been doing a bit of work myself recently. Anyone that's been sort of following me would notice I've been doing a lot of emotional intelligence and fitness. I appreciate you probably outlined that they're not the same thing, like emotional awareness. They're linked, but particularly recently I've been trying to get out of the happiness trap. And I think it's probably from your point, the ambition world. I've done a whole lot of that stuff, and don't get me wrong, like, there's still things that I will achieve in my life moving forward, but more now it's about purpose and meaning and who I'm doing it with. But particularly one of the things that's been quite life-changing for me is about how if I'm very grateful for what I already have, then anything that I achieve or pursue moving forward is an opportunity. So grateful for whether I have it and it goes down or whether it goes up, sort of thing. So then if I can do that, it means that rather than being like defined essentially like what you said earlier by my results as to, oh, we're having a downward trend, my life sucks and lots of stuff. It's like, no, what a great opportunity. I'm learning how to face adversity. I'm learning how to be more resilient, resourceful, whatever that might look like. And so that there's a lesson in it. And I think there's a book called The Happiness Trap that they sort of go through it, but particularly gratitude, I think it's definitely been a door that's opened a lot of windows for myself. So
Yeah. Well, happiness is a fascinating topic because, yeah, the ambition-driven world sells us on have a bit more of this and have a bit more of that,
yeah,
and
yeah,
happy. Happiness is very fleeting. This is why I love when we look at the meaning-driven world. The meaning-driven world is no longer about getting happy, but about becoming fulfilled. And when you become
yeah,
fulfilled, being in a state of fulfillment, you can feel sadness and anger and frustration and joy and happiness itself, but still be fulfilled as a human being. Whereas happiness is generally determined by lots of external situations or circumstances. Now, I don't want to simplify or minimize, not simplify. I don't want to minimize the whole happiness thing, but you can't be happy 24/7. The meaning only comes through contrast. So we only know happiness if we know sadness. We only know love if we know hate. We can't know just one thing. So it's all in the same spectrum of perception. So
that makes a lot of sense in regards to those that end up winning the lottery. They don't end up having a level of happiness that stays up. They get used to it, right?
yeah, well, winning the lottery is a massive hedonic hit. It's
Yeah,
like
yeah.
you're bond with this incredible euphoria. But in a lot of cases, the reason why it ends in tears for a lot of people is because they haven't become the thinker or the character that can handle that volume of money, right?
Mm.
So, for example, if the guy down the road wins $5 million and he's been earning $45,000 a year, he is not psychologically prepared for that. As much as anyone earning $45,000 a year winning $5 million, I'd say, you're kidding me? You crazy? It's like, no, you're going to lose it within 5 years because you're not the person, you haven't become that person yet. But someone who's created $5 million over a decade or whatever period of time, they've become that. It's a very, very different journey. And that's one of the reasons, it's not the reason, but it's one of the reasons why lottery winners often end in tears.
Yeah. Well, I think we'll stay on that tune of fulfillment because this is
Yeah.
quite an interesting one and also lead a little bit into the space of practitioners in the allied health space. So one of the things I mentioned it to you when we were at the event the other day, about 3 to 5 years is a very common period of time that practitioners in the allied health space, they go to uni, so they might spend 3 to 5 years studying, and then they only stay in the space for 3 to 5 years. So burnout is the sort of topic there. So I'm curious to know, what would you say the keys are in regards to avoiding burnout? And then also having probably the fulfillment is what we're really wanting to have. You wanting to have fulfillment in your career, you wanting to have longevity in that. Obviously burnout's, probably not the answer. How do we avoid
Yeah.
burnout?
Well, first of all, we need to establish that, burnout is a complex issue. It's not simple. There's no just
Mm.
this or don't do that and you'll be fine.
Yeah.
It's just, we all know that that doesn't work. But burnout is a very complex issue because it's very much determined and influenced by a combination of the circumstances that the person finds themselves in and the quality of their psychology and how they view that particular circumstance. And so that's really important to note. So from a macro sort of generic point of view, there are lots, and so therefore there are lots of reasons why a person will experience burnout. One of the reasons that could be the reason is because there could be a values misalignment. That's a possibility
Mm.
where because when we look at values in its connection to burnout, values are a verb, not a noun. And that's crucial. That's probably one of the most important parts of what we're talking about here, because a value is an activity that you immerse in that brings you joy. Whether it's swimming, playing a guitar, creating art, whatever sings to your soul, right? And if you don't have a healthy, consistent, sustainable outlet where you can go and bring joy to your soul by doing something that makes you feel good, the probability of you burning out in a job increases. So, in other words, if I'm doing a job, well, I'm not, but if I was, I'd be leaning. Oh, actually, I'll give you a real life example, Trevor, an actual fair income example. When I left my last job, which was back in 2005, and I started setting up my business and starting in February of 2006, I was at the risk of doing burnout in my first year because I literally did not know where is the first $100 going to come from, the first $50, the first dollar. And I borrowed money from the bank, 30,000 to be exact, which was enough to get me started. And back then in 2006, we had no kids yet. My wife and I had a small mortgage, so our cost of living was quite low. And 30 grand was enough to buy me about 4 or 5 months of activity. So I could go out and meet people and start doing my work. And so the energy that took would have definitely have burnt me out in my first year. And one of the reasons why I didn't was because of values. Well, what do you mean? So running is something that I love doing. It is absolutely something that matters immensely in my life. I've just happened to have discovered a mode of exercise that my body responds to really, really well. And I seem to get a joy from the kinesthetic experience. I get a joy from the rhythm of it. I just love it. And I run 5 or 6 days a week. And the reason why I'm sharing this with you is because back then, with all of the uncertainty that was going on with my new work, literally every day was different. I didn't know what was going to happen next. Running was one constant in my life that was that was resourceful. So back then I was running 5 days a week. I had a running community I was part of. There was a running group that we would meet twice a week with a professional coach. That was something I was familiar with. It was something that I loved. It was something I actually adored. And so I had something to look forward to multiple times a week, which I personally am reasonably convinced that was the reason why I never got to the stage of burning out completely, because I mentally, energetically, emotionally, and spiritually had something to look forward to. And I call this in my work, I call it micro hope, which is having something to look forward to within your psychological headlights. So, when we drive a car at night, we can only see what's in front of us. We can't see what's up the mountain around the corner. Well, mentally or psychologically, we should have within our headlights, within our purview, today, at the time of this recording, it's a Tuesday. Do you have something to look forward to before the weekend, on Thursday or Wednesday or Friday? Well, I've got my running up here. I'm in my new lifestyle here with my family and my wife, and my kids. Here in Noosa, we have a track group, an athletics track group that meets every Wednesday. And as it happens to be, here I am with you, Trevor, on a Tuesday. And I know that in the backdrop of my psyche is an awareness that I've got this session on tomorrow, which is really hard, but just fantastic. And you get
Mm.
to be, and you share it with all these other people. So now I no longer have the depths of uncertainty that I had when I first started business 18 or 19 years ago. So the risk of burnout now is very, very low. But back then, when it was high, I needed that. So what I want to suggest to your listeners and to your clients and to anyone listening to this is one of the, using the immortal words of Molly Meldrum. I don't know if your listeners know Molly Meldrum, who had a rock music show back in the 80s and 90s called Countdown. Anyway, in the immortal words of Molly Meldrum, when he used to promote the latest In Excess album, he would say, do yourself a favor and go out and buy this album, right? Well, psychologically, I want to say to all your beautiful people, do yourself a favor. And if you haven't got it already, go and explore what makes your soul sing. Are you artistic?
Mm.
Are you musical? Are you physical? I'm a physical person. Like I love my running physically. You're spiritual, you're intellectual, you're philosophical. What kind of hobbies, what flavor of hobby would bring you joy? And what's important to add to this is that by embracing that hobby, you're also becoming what is known as becoming a person who's functionally selfish. Functionally selfish. And when someone is functionally selfish, it's you take on the hobby with zero guilt. You go and take on the hobby. It's all about you and you only. You're doing it for you. And then when you go back to your work or to your family or to whatever realms you need to go back to perform your responsibilities, you know that now it's time for my son. Now it's time for my team. Now it's time for my
Mm.
clients because I've taken time for me this morning or tonight. I'm doing my whatever you're doing. So I can't speak highly enough of that. And how do we know that everything I've just said is true? Well, the only way we can know, maybe it's not the only way, but the way that I test, I do the little mini thought experiments all the time. And we can do a little thought experiment right here. And that is that, well, if we reverse engineer everything I just said, what happens? Well, if we have nothing to look forward to every week, if we don't have a hobby that makes our soul sing, and we're experiencing pressure at work, what's going to happen there? Are we going to be going down the road of burnout? Probably, if we don't have anything that's bringing us joy.
Mm.
So that's one way of managing and handling burnout.
Well, Joe, just reflecting upon that, particularly in regards to the space, I'm in contact with quite a lot of practitioners in our space, and we've got the NDIS, National Disability Insurance Scheme, absolutely exploding. So huge amounts of job opportunities around, lots of stuff, but particularly values is one of the things that, and being the emotional compass comes up. So you've got heaps of organizations that are out there. Not all of them necessarily are values aligned. So then this comes into some decisions. So maybe people take on a role which might financially be really good, but for the soul, it's really bad. And maybe they don't have these outlets and all sorts of stuff. Like I know the whole, I think it's cognitive dissonance, which is a fancy old word for essentially like if you're doing something that your heart's not in, before you know it, you'll sort of disengage. I don't know if that's sort of put well, but like as in,
Yeah, that's
I'm
probably
curious to,
well.
I'm curious to know for you in regards to people in some of the decisions that they make, like because nowadays we're so affected by social media, we're so affected by externalization, like as in we're so busy, achievements related to self-esteem, but realistically we need to be able to have our own self-perception and awareness, and a lot of these things are easy to do but very easy not to do. I'm curious to know, how can we get more in touch, understand what our values are, because I think a lot of people in society might not necessarily be doing that work. It's Netflix is very convenient, right? We've gone from, you used some words earlier, stoic being about, essentially putting off now for the benefit of later on, which is where a lot of fulfillment, I believe, comes from. And then you've got Epicurean, which is, if I'm just doing things for now, it's like a sugar rush now, which is great. I can feel good in the moment, but we know if we do that long term, that's not going to be sustainable. So how do people overcome these type of challenges? Big
Yeah,
question.
yeah, it is big. Well, it's I'll share with you, I guess, how I do all this, and that is that things like whatever the latest show on Binge or Netflix or whatever, that's for the weekends for us. Like I work from home 70% of the time. I'm on Zoom or I'm doing things online, and then I travel a bit. So, but when I'm home, like this is a typical week where I'm home all week, and you know, it's extremely rare because it's happened before, but it's extremely rare that you'll find me. I definitely wouldn't be in front of the TV watching a show on my own. But if my wife wanted to catch up on a show and I'd gotten what I needed to get done for the day, and this is extremely rare, we might watch something, but really it's for the weekends for us, for me. So it's about, in other words, it's about segregating different parts of your life. It sounds a bit robotic, and that's not the intention. Segregating different parts of your life makes a massive difference on your emotional health and your emotional fitness, because there's a critical thinking principle that says that what you focus on expands, and what you stop focusing on ceases to exist in your experience. So if you wake up in the morning scrolling whatever form of social media tickles your fancy, then you're allowing that social media to have an influence on how you feel. So in the emotional fitness formula, we often talk about how every morning when you wake up, our psychological landscape, our consciousness completely resets. It's literally like an ocean beach. Many years ago, Trev, my wife and I were this is a long time ago when we lived in Victoria, we were staying at a place called Venus Bay, and there's a gorgeous ocean beach down there. And one morning when we were walking, Sylv, my wife, she said, "Oh my Lord, I love how the beach just resets every day. Like it doesn't care what happened yesterday. All evidence of footprints and sandcastles and all kinds of activities are a reset. And here we are, which is the clean beach to start a brand new day, regardless of the weather." And I said, "Oh my Lord, that is a podcast right there." So, because that's our consciousnness works exactly the same way. Now, it's reset every morning. And if the first thing I'm doing is getting out my phone and looking at social media scrolls, I'm now digging a particular kind of hole on my beach. And it's not the sort of hole that I really want to dig. And what you focus on expands. So now I go from one link to another link to another link. So now what's expanding in my world, because none of us quantum physicists have said, and I'm ad-libbing big time here, none of us have got direct access to reality. We've only got access to our experience of reality, which is a fancy way of saying all we have is our perception, which is effectively our mind. We can't live outside of our mind. It's impossible in this human condition. So what we allow in and what we get to experience in our perception becomes our actual reality. So if I'm going from link to link to link, first thing in the morning, I'm creating a flavor on my psychological beach that is not going to be doing me any favors. So if I start stressing out of some issue on the other side of the globe that I can't do anything about, and then I go to work, and I've got that in my mind, that in my vibe, that in my frequency, that in my emotional range, that's going to impact. And then there's a pressure situation in the work environment. Suddenly I'm not as equipped and ready to handle and navigate that uncertainty because of what I've done to my beach. I've destroyed my beach before I even begin. So this is important that every morning. So therefore, when I say segregation, because that's a very sterile word when it comes to living a good life, is what I mean by that is have a conscious intention and set up your life where when you wake up in the morning, do you have a book or something to read or watch or whatever that is actually enhancing your beach rather than destroying it? That's really, really important.
Yeah, that's incredible. I know, Joe, when we were at the event the other day, I don't know if you want to go through the couple levels of truth, because I feel like that might actually be quite useful in regards to how you change your emotional state, and also want to jump into the topic of boundaries as well, because I feel like that's also compartmentalizing and made up of a few different things. So maybe we'll go through the assumed level of truth in a few of those.
Yeah, sure. So in the emotional flexibility part of the emotional fitness formula, we have, as I said earlier, emotions don't respond to facts. They only respond to the meaning that we give the facts. And what's interesting about meaning is that whenever we are experiencing anything, there are three levels of interpretation or three levels of truth. The first level is imagined truth. So your friend doesn't text you back and it's been 3 days. At imagined level of truth, we've got a lot of drama going on in our heads and a big story carrying on about why they haven't called me back. And that's going to start making me feel a certain way, impact the way I feel about my friend and about the fact that this person has not responded back to my text message, for example. And most people stay in the imagined level of truth, which is absolutely racked and riddled in drama. And of course, the more dedicated someone is to their drama, the less of them there is to take responsibility for the things that matter in life. So it's a fascinating strategy. And then the second is the assumed level of truth. An assumed level of truth is more indifferent. It's more neutral. It doesn't impact us emotionally as much. So my friend hasn't texted back. The assumed level of truth is, look, I know Trevor's a busy guy, so I'll give him a couple of days. I might send him a reminder. And the way I feel about that is not going to impact my day. Whereas the other way, Trevor hasn't responded to my message, insert fabricated story here, it's going to impact how I feel about you, how I feel about myself, and it's going to impact my beach.
Yeah.
So, and then you got the third level, which is the actual truth. And actual truth deals with just the facts and no interpretation whatsoever. So Trevor hasn't texted me back. The facts are I've texted, and that's all I have. I don't know if Trevor's received the text. And the other fact I have is that he hasn't responded and I don't know why, and it's okay. It's just dealing with the facts. So I often share with people the healthiest for everyday experiences. Swinging somewhere between assumed and actual is a very healthy realm to hang around in. Imagined level of truth has its uses when we're experiencing something extreme that's very difficult. So say a parent who's lost their child in a shopping center, that is very, very scary, to put it in the extreme least. So you would go to imagined level of truth because you would need to start to work out what are some probabilities of what might have happened. So in those circumstances, imagined level of truth has its use, but in everyday experiences that aren't as extreme as that, imagined level of truth, all it does is exacerbate our drama. So they're the three levels of interpretation, or three levels of meaning, or the three levels of truth.
Yeah, well, I'm curious then to expand into the space of boundaries. I think this sort of goes into compartmentalizing, and I've done a little bit of work in this. You've got intellectual boundaries, emotional boundaries, time boundaries, and all that sort of stuff. I suppose in our space, we tend to have quite emotional people that are caring people. Caring people in a caring space makes quite a lot of sense.
Yeah,
So it also makes a lot of sense that, sometimes that emotional boundary might be a little bit blurred because they're
sure.
wanting to give maybe beyond what's sort of not necessarily fair, but like essentially they might not want to be assertive and say, Joe, actually, sorry, we've got to head off, and do
Yeah,
that in a polite way. So they stay around, and that creates a time boundary issue because now ultimately they're behind time and schedule, and then they also might then have like a boundary issue, for example, that they're now intellectually thinking about that person that they were working with outside of work, which you would argue is an intellectual boundary because work time's the work time and outside of work's not. So you don't have to specifically go on that example, but I'm curious to know about how you perceive boundaries and
yeah.
how you might deal with them.
Well, there's a whole model that we have in values in the EFF that goes deep into boundaries, which we just haven't got the time to cover here, because if I introduce it, it takes a while to explain. It's reasonably complex, but I'll share with you something that I think will be extremely useful in the time that we have to our people listening here. There's one, so two things with boundaries. People who are very good at boundaries, and people who are not very good. I'm sort of talking in a really simple way here, but is that there's two fundamental differences in the way that they think and two fundamental differences in how they perceive themselves. The most crucial ingredient that we need to have in our psychology to have boundaries happens to also be the greatest gift that any person can give themselves psychologically. And I'll share what that is in a second. Because if we don't have this particular component in our thinking, in our awareness, and in our mindset, it's virtually impossible to have clarity on where you end and somebody else begins, or where something needs to be stopped, or something needs to be accepted, or something needs to be rejected, or when do you say yes and when do you say no? This fundamental ingredient is the thing. And it's the greatest gift we can give ourselves. And that is self-respect. And most people I'm profoundly certain of this because I've been with tens of thousands of people over the years, right? So, uh, lack of self-respect is one of the biggest psychological problems that we have. It's not anxiety and depression. It's two things. It's lack of self-respect and lack of self-trust. Self-trust is a whole other topic that's related to this, but self-respect. So if we think about this, if you have a healthy level without going into ego inflation, if you have
Mm.
a healthy level of self-respect, then you have clarity as to when you'll say no, when you'll say you need to go, when you'll say yes, when you'll accept, reject, move forward, move back, move sideways around any situation, because you have that level of respect. And it also means that your tolerance level for anyone who tries to broach a boundary is virtually zero. And a mentor of mine said to me a long time ago, we are continually teaching people how to treat us, whether we are aware of it or whether we're not. So
This
if
is like
someone
dog
crosses
training.
is that right?
This is like dog training when they jump up and they're cute when they're really small, but then you don't realize you're teaching them to jump up if you pat them.
There you
So
go.
keep going.
Yeah, spot on, spot on. So if someone like in our marriage, like we've been married for 28 years at the time of this recording, and we're the happiest we've ever been now for the last, many, many years. And one of the reasons for that is because of a profound level of mutual respect and self-respect that we each have. So in other words, if there's a tone, a subtle tone that is just not quite right from from me to my wife, or my wife to me, that is corrected right then and there. So it's like, for example, if I have a poor tone around something, right? That's borderline sort of disrespectful. Silvana will say to me, she goes, "Hey, I don't like the way you said that. What's going on with this? I don't like the way you said that." And then it's handled in the moment. It's handled while it's a micro dot of a seed before it becomes a freaking tree, right?
Mm.
So we're teaching each other how we're teaching everyone around us how to treat it. So if we don't do anything about that and let it go, we've just taught the other person it's okay to talk to me like that. And you can only do this if you have a very healthy level of self-respect. And the way, and this, and I know we're coming to a close here, Trev, I can feel that, but because people are going to ask, that's great, Joe, but how do I build my self-respect? Which is a very important question. And one of the ways to build self-respect, there's lots of ways, is to start doing things for yourself that are good, like creating the hobby that we spoke about earlier. Because when you do a hobby that feels good, that is completely naturally aligned to who you are and the type of body that you have and the type of intellect that you have and all these sorts of things, you're doing something out of self-love, self-benefit, and self-respect. And this is how you build your self-respect, you see. So that's one of the ways of building it. But
That's incredible. That's incredible. You've just shared that. That's very resonant for me, particularly now because I've recently got into exercising. I've just got a 13 weeks old is my son, Ted.
Oh,
And
congratulations. I think
thank you.
did you share that with me when I met you? I can't remember.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And so
Yeah.
very excited about that. Obviously, that's meaning sleep's a luxury compared to what it was. And one of the things that I've particularly done just prior to him coming along and then after is actually exercising out of an act of self-love. And particularly, it might seem very boring, but I particularly use ChatGPT to come up with a whole list of things and benefits, beliefs that I would have to have about myself to exercise regularly because I'm usually one of these ones that I'm on exercising. So 3 months, 3, 4 times a week, very consistently, but then 3 months completely off. You know what I mean?
Right.
Just yo-yoing. And I'm like, this is
Yeah.
no good. I'm like, hold up. No, no, no. I need to actually show up and be consistent. And the only way I can
Well,
be
the trick
consistent.
there is to find a form of exercise or physical movement that you enjoy. So when someone
Mm,
does that on and off, it tells me that maybe potentially you're doing the wrong type of exercise that suits your body type, your energy, your mind, and all that. So, like my sons, for example, love CrossFit,
yeah.
and I've tried CrossFit. It's just not for me.
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
just doesn't feel right to me. But other people, my God, they just love it. Like I love running. And other people,
Yeah.
like I ran into a guy this morning who said, yeah, no, I can't run it. My ankles, my knees, my this or that. It's like, it's okay. Like, it's just not for you. So that tells me that you just need to find a physical expression that you actually look forward to and you'll never yo-yo again.
Yeah. Well, I mean, ever since I've been doing that work, it's been incredible. I've been doing 3, 4 times a week and looking forward to it, excited, checking in with my energy and all that sort of stuff as well, which has been great. The last question I'd like to go into, Joe, I do know that we need to wrap up, is particularly around self-awareness, because I think you said that that was maybe 95% of the game, or I don't know exactly, but like
Yeah.
as in, how does one increase that self-awareness?
Yeah, great question. Again, complex thing, like everything in human behavior. But so one way is reflection. So let's just say a conversation today didn't go as well as you'd hope, right? And when the dust settles from that conversation, you might have a moment alone. You might want to reflect with a journal, or reflect in your mind, or reflect by writing stuff down is often very good. Where, okay, well, and then you ask yourself some intelligent questions like, how did I contribute to that conversation not going well today? What was the
Mm,
role I played in that? Gee, I wonder how I created that perception of whatever I was talking about. And these questions, which are need to be filled with a very healthy level of curiosity, is how you start building self-awareness. But if we walk away from a conversation that didn't go as well as we would hope it would have gone, and we start whinging and carrying on about the other person and how they're dumb and they don't get it and and all that kind of stuff, well, that lacks self-awareness. So the way that we build self-awareness is to ask questions like that. What was my role in that? What did I contribute to that? What was the purpose of that? Gee, I wonder how I created that perception of me in that conversation. And then you'll start asking for feedback from people that you trust and love, who can give you feedback and or share insights of what they've noticed about you that you might have not noticed about you. Um, the other way to also start looking into self-awareness is through the quality of your relationships.
mm,
That's the ultimate truth, you know. It's funny, you know, in personal development, in the personal development circles where, you know, someone might have been working on themselves, which is great, and read lots of books, which is great. And then they feel that they've got it all together, and then it's like, okay, time to put you into a relationship and see how you go.
mm. The
In
no-do gap.
yeah, relationships are the ultimate teacher of who you are. They really are. So if your relationships or your friendships, whether they're relationships and friendships at work or personally or whatever, or your love relationship with the person that you spend the most time with, or with your son or your daughter, the way that those people treat you and the way they respond to you is everything you need to know about becoming self-aware. So, because they bring up awareness of our blind spots. Good relationships bring up awareness of our blind spots, and when we start to see those blind spots, and they're no longer blind spots, our self-awareness expands.
Yeah, fantastic. I think some absolute nuggets there. That does bring today's episode to an end. I hope you did find it educational and learnt something from it. As fellow Aussies, you know that there is nothing worse than being stingy. So if you've got value from this, please do feel to share it with anyone who you think may benefit, whether that's a friend, a colleague, or a family member. Let's continue to move the world forward. Joe, before we close off, do you have any final words you'd like to share with our listeners?
Yeah, be loyal to your heart. Be loyal to what brings you joy, and that will just bring so much value into your life and to the lives of others. And really appreciate you having me here today, Trevor.
Not a worry at all. As always, if you've got any feedback for us, please do get in touch via the email. Likewise, if you're after any allied health services, get in touch with us at Conscious Healthcare SA. The details you'll need will be in the show notes, and we'll also put a link in there to Joe's book. Fantastic read. We'll see you on the next episode. Thanks so much.